Hi, welcome to New Natalie Workshop. Welcome back guys to another edition of New Natalie Workshop. This video's a bit of a mishmash of things really. It's bits and pieces of me improving my shed, trying to get closer to that workshop that I've always dreamed about. Slow progress, I'm afraid. There's so many other things to be doing, but these are just a few little clips of me measuring up and moving bits and pieces around to make it more usable as a space for woodworking. Before, most of the shed was taken up with a workbench that I put in that was far too big for the space and just meant you couldn't move in there really. Most of this stuff doesn't need its own introduction really. Basically what I'm doing is measuring up legs and braces in order to brace a work surface away from the shed wall. Most of the construction is done with pocket hole screws, and you'll see me sizing things up, doing things by eye. With a project like this, it doesn't need to be as exact as a piece of furniture or a box or something of that nature. Particularly small projects, the smallest mistakes and details in small boxes, for instance, have a tendency to show up quite badly. Part of this video is going to be dedicated to a keepsake box that I made for my wife for her birthday this year. I had fun making the project. I learnt a lot. I'm learning rapidly that I'm not an accurate woodworker necessarily. I'm better at the construction stuff, but I would like to be a proper woodworker. So what follows after these clips is a kind of breakdown of me making that box, and I'll try and talk you through it as we go. This is basically me squaring up the blank for the box, and it does help if it's exactly square, but I didn't like the rounded over corners on it anyway. Although I'm going to put a chamfer on it again later, it's probably better if it's not there at the outset. You'll excuse the vibration from the camera, but that's because it's standing on the shed floor. Basically what I'm doing here is squaring up the ends of the blank and making sure that they're at right angles to the faces. I'm doing this with a homemade crosscut sled. If you're interested in making one of these, there are videos all over the internet and YouTube for this. I can go into that at some point or another for you. In fact, I do need to make another one because the runners on that one have started to wear away. What I was doing there was checking the width of the sides in order to decide how deep to make the box, just to keep the dimensions as clean as I possibly can. But you'll see now that my saw depth of cut isn't enough to go all the way through this blank. Of course this forced me into making as accurate a cut as I can for the last bit, but unfortunately I ended up with a lot of kerf marks on the inside of the box. This wasn't too much of a problem because I'm planning to plough out the inside of the box anyway, and this is how I go about doing that. I've decided what the width of the front and the back of the box are going to be, set my table saw fence to that point and the height to halfway through the thickness of the top and the bottom, and I'm basically marking with the blade where either end of the box lid and base are going to come. These two pieces are practically identical. What you'll see me doing now is I've shifted the fence across and I'm basically checking where the blade comes for the furthest cut, and I'm going to lock the saw blade down just inside that so I can nibble away the material inside the lid and the base, and you'll see that now. I'll apologise for the vibration on the camera again. I'll try to make sure on the next video that isn't an issue, but unfortunately because it's on a tripod on the shed floor, obviously the table saw makes the floor vibrate quite heavily. I'll be working on some damping for that at some point as well as part of the modifications for this shed. So once you've found that outside edge, it's really then just a matter of nibbling away the material. So I'm moving the fence across by about 2mm at a time and just slowly nibbling away at it. It's long-winded, but as long as you take your time and don't rush it, you can get quite good results. Unfortunately dado stacks are not allowed in Britain, otherwise this job would go much quicker. And you can obviously tell from this that until I get around to making a modification for my rip fence, I'm stuck with the one that came with the table, and it's pretty basic to be fair, and you can see even on this video that it's moving. So once you get to the other end and all your material's been hogged away, it's a much quicker way of doing it obviously than using a router, and you don't need any support because the table's already there. Essentially then it's just a matter of making sure that the inside of this thing is as flat as possible. You can tell from this section it's quite a dusty job, even with my dust collection on, which actually is just an adapted old Hoover. The next step is to make sure that you sand down the inside of the box, and I found the easiest way to do this is to take a squared block and wrap it in sandpaper and actually glue the sandpaper to the block, and you'll see why in a second. Just make sure it's nice and tight against the block before you glue it. I just use spray adhesive for that, and this is what you end up with. Essentially the reason for that is because the right angle can get right in the corners of that lid and the base and make sure that the two sides get sanded at the same time to some extent. And what I did then was applied some double-sided stick tape to the bottom and used that to stick the top to it, and you'll see why now. Bit over particular with the tape there, but you stick the two pieces together and essentially it's in a position where the box will be at the end of the project. Essentially this is a good way for me to set the depth of my table saw to cut the tenons on the bottom of the box. So essentially what you do is line them up as best you can, and then from there it's just as simple as setting the table saw height until it reaches the bottom of the box. So obviously the box is upside down in this instance. Raise the blade up on your saw, get a tooth at the top, make sure that you're running more or less up to the place where you're going to cut the tenon on the base, and then it's just as simple as running the whole thing through the table saw to take away the excess material. First I need to set up the width away from the fence that I need to cut this, and the tenon obviously is going to be around about half the thickness of the sides of the box. So I've just eyeballed that. As long as it's the same on both sides, it's probably slightly over half just to allow some space for some glue, but in reality I'm going to cut the mortises on those sides anyway afterwards. Then it's just a matter of running it through the table saw, and this will make your first cut to run up to kind of like a cheek cut on a normal tenon, but it takes off the excess on the bottom half, or rather the top half of the box, because it's upside down. If you watch this, I had a bit of a mishap here, but it's a good job I was standing off to the side. See that? That's the top half of the box flying backwards past me. If I'd been standing next to it, or rather behind it, that quite likely would have hit me in the stomach. I then took a flush cut saw, and there are a couple of tabs on either side. It's just a matter of cutting those off. And I'm going to do that for both ends of the box. Now if I'd thought this through, I probably would have taken it straight to the bandsaw in order to cut those tabs off either side, but this is what I did anyway. Took it to the bandsaw straight after that and just cut those sections off that I didn't need, and did that on both ends. The trouble with this method was it was a matter of making sure they were flush with the bits I'd already cut on the table saw, which left me with a little bit of scraping to do on each part, but it ended up pretty good altogether. I then cut the mortises in the side pieces, basically dropping a side piece over a straight bit cutter against the fence on my router table, and I used 2 stop blocks to make sure that the mortise wasn't any longer than it needed to be. You need to be a bit careful when you do this, because obviously that router cutter is spinning really quickly, but as long as you hold on to it tight enough and keep it against the fence, you know it's going to be exactly where you want it to be and exactly the right length. It's worth mentioning actually that I ran a test piece before I did this, just to check that the settings were all correct, and that's a good way to avoid messing up your workpiece. All that was left then was to drill out the pins for the hinges, which you'll see in the following photos. Basically they go through the sides of the box using a metal pin to hinge the lid. These photos are of a height chart I've been putting together for my granddaughter, who's just turning 2 in the next month. You'll notice that there are quite a few mistakes in the engraving and various bits and pieces. So what I'm going to be showing you as well over the next video or so is how I corrected some of those problems and hopefully produce something that's worthy of my beautiful granddaughter. So keep watching and let's see. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll be posting hopefully another video inside the next week. Don't hold your breath though. You can tell obviously from the length of time it's taken to get this video out that I'm not as quick as I would like, but I hope you enjoyed watching. If you did, leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you again soon.